Duh.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm late to the party, but I just recently saw the movie Weapons, the movie everyone's been talking about, and you know what? I have thoughts. We're going to dive into those thoughts today, and we're going to talk about why everyone loves this film so much lately. So if you want to hear the answers to that, stick around to find out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is my review of Weapons. We're going to talk about the things I liked about the movie, the things I didn't like about the movie, and we're going to talk a lot about why I think this film has been getting so much praise from everybody lately, because I can see some correlations here. So, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Case Swope, by the way. Thank you guys all for tuning in. I'm the only YouTuber you know that just got a haircut today. All right, so let's talk about the good things I think I liked about the movie. The first thing that comes to mind is I remember hearing, I believe it was Jordan Peele, if I'm not mistaken, talk about how he transitioned from doing comedy with, Key and Peele to being a horror movie director, which is a very interesting transition. And I feel like from him, I always hear about how comedy and horror are very similar, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And this film really walks those lines, and they kind of blur together in a lot of places. And I'll tell you what I mean a little later, but let me kind of explain a brief summary right here. So for example, with a joke, okay, if you're doing something funny, you have to have a setup, right? You have the setup, then you have the punchline, and everything lands, right? And then occasionally, you might come back to that or do something, else sort of like that. But horror's the same way, right? You have the setup, then you have the punchline, or in this case, the scare. So you kind of have to build up to that. So if you ever noticed in just generic, not the best well done oftentimes horror movies, whenever there's a jump scare coming, you notice the music goes down and the other extra noise seems to tamper. Well, that's because they're trying to set up the jump scare. So there's a lot of things like that you can see. This film thankfully does not have a lot of those same issues, but I will say that there are a lot of moments that are actually really funny, and some that are ironically funny, some that are, I don't think they're supposed to be ironically funny, but it's got some funny moments. Like there's a lady who walks outside a house with scissors, and she just looks so dumb as she's walking through because she's like possessed by the Gladys, the evil lady at the end of the film. But it looks hilarious. I was sitting there in the theater and everyone around me was laughing, and I'm like, yeah, it does look pretty stupid, doesn't it? But it was still scary enough because I'm like, if I saw that in the middle of the night, some lady come out of the house walking toward me that way with like scissors, that would make me very uncomfortable. I would definitely be creeped out. So it was creepy, but kind of funny. I think it was more funny because I was not actually there in this scenario. But there's a lot of moments like that too. There's another moment later in the film where Josh Brolin's character, we're going to talk more about the characters, by the way, later, but Josh Brolin's character is getting attacked by this guy, and he's also, possessed or whatever, and he, punches him. He seems to be knocked out for a second or two. Then he gets up and lunges at him again, and then he punches him again, and his hand hurts. And then he gets up and lunges at him again after another second or two. And he does it like 3 or 4 times, and it kind of gets funnier each time, and it's hilarious. So I really, really enjoyed that. And so, yeah, it does have some very scary moments too. But I have to point out that the comedy to horror ratio is funny, and it doesn't make anything less serious in the film. Like, it doesn't take away from the very serious story that they're telling. But it's, I don't know, it's so interesting because it's nice to see those funny moments, even though the funny moments don't take away. I don't know how they pull it off, but they do a good job at it. Something else that really helps in the originality department is this. The format of the film is very, very nice. I feel like I've seen in another show or something that has done this similar format. But what it is you follow one character's story, one character's perspectives for a couple minutes, for, I don't know, like 10 to 15 minutes or so, and then you switch throughout and you see different things. So for example, the movie has a setup, okay? The first 2 minutes or so, there is a monologue, and they're kind of setting the scene. All these kids disappear at 2:17 a.m., and it's insane, and they're all from this one girl's class, okay? All but one kid disappears from this one girl's class, and we start by following that teacher, Justine, okay? We follow her for a little while, and then that kind of ends sort of abruptly. And then we go and we follow Josh Brolin's character, okay, Matthew's dad, whatever his first name is. We follow him, and he's picking up from a different point, slightly before where we pick up with Justine. So there's a little bit of time shenanigans going on, but the thing that I think makes it most interesting is as the viewer, you can piece things together by watching these different perspectives and be like, oh, okay, this connects to this and this connects to that. But none of the characters actually have it all connected in their minds, which is also really, really interesting. And then when we get to the end of the film, something that I noticed that is very, very fascinating is the threat is neutralized, Gladys is destroyed. She has this little tree with a stick or whatever. There's different ways to use it and stuff. The kid Alex uses it. He gets the kids to literally tear apart Gladys. It's pretty insane, pretty gruesome, but kind of funny at the same time. But the interesting thing is this. It is that they don't actually save anyone, because the kids and everyone who is, under Gladys's control, they're still in this trance. And they alluded to the fact that some of them, after however length of time, I forget what they said at the end of the film, began to start speaking again, some of them, which is, insane. But because of that, we would know, if we watch all the perspectives, how to, break the spell or whatever that's going on. But the other characters don't know that. And because they don't know that, the only people who would know that are dead. So they can't really help. And as a result, knowing that we know how to solve it, but the characters don't, because we've seen everyone's perspectives and we understand how this whole thing works, but the characters in it don't. That is also very, very interesting. Makes some really new dynamics. I think it's fascinating because I talk about originality a lot, okay? I like when people innovate and they do things that are interesting. And in today's world, it feels like it's so hard to innovate because it feels like everything's kind of sort of already been done and we know what's good and what's not good. And so this film feels great because it has a nice original take. It twists things, and I think in today's world what you have to do is take what already exists and then add something or apply it to make it unique and of its own. And I think this film accomplishes that very well with both the humor and with how the story is told in the formats, jumping perspectives. Again, every 10-15 minutes you're following a new character, and so you have a good idea of the whole story, what's going on, but the characters in the film don't have the whole picture. They don't know what all is going on, and that makes it a really, really unique way to tell the story. I've also got to point out that, as I mentioned, the comedy and the humor are very balanced, and they do a good job on both fronts. The horror, though, specifically, I want to talk about, specifically jump scares. I'm a sucker for jump scares, meaning I hate them and they get me really bad. But like I said before, most films, when they're coming because you hear it get silent and then, just something happens. And this film's got a few cheap jump scare moments, like 2 or 3 of them I can think of off the top of my head. However, there are a lot of what I think are really good setup jump scares that you don't see coming, and that really, really helps. Like, for one, there's a scene where Justine's having a nightmare, and the nightmare kind of ends in a little bit of a scare, not much of a jump scare, okay? And then she wakes up and it's oh, it's all a dream and stuff like that. And then she lays back down in bed. Now, here's the great part. You think that that's the scare in that scene. You think the scare is, oh, okay, the kid and the nightmare she's having. And so that happens. You're okay, that was the scare, blah, blah, blah. But it's not the scare, because what happens is once she lays back in bed, on the ceiling is Gladys for 2 seconds, and it scares the crap out of you, because she is a very creepy looking lady when she's got all of her, well, generally, but also when she's got her whole makeup and wig on, and it's very unsettling. And as you can imagine, that makes for some crazy jump scares. And after that, then it goes, but it's that was a really good bait and switch there that I was not expecting. And it didn't feel overdone. Like I said, it felt original. So I got to give praise where praise is due. I've also got to talk about how stacked the cast is. There are some really notable names on here. A lot of them being superheroes, so a lot of fun things to look up to. For one, we have female Silver Surfer. We have Thanos himself. We have Wong and Justin Long. All heroes in their own right. Something else I got to point out too, and this is something that I always see in horror movies. I see this in a lot of stuff. I'm going to warn you right now, if you have an issue with the Second Amendment, you're going to want to, skip ahead a little bit, maybe to this timestamp, because I'm about to go on a big pro Second Amendment rant with this film. But, okay, in horror movies, in movies in general, people just need to carry more guns, okay? Because at the end of this film specifically also, they're getting beat up by this mind-controlled cop dude, and this, how can I say this to be YouTube friendly? Person who has an addiction to an illicit substance. We'll put it like that. Anyways, they're fighting them, they're under their mind control, okay? They kind of got the upper hand. And then Justine pulls the firearm out of the police's thing and busts a cap at them. And, they do that, and that just solves the problem. And I'm like, guys, if you would have just brought weapons, pun intended, real weapons, good weapons, to begin with, this whole thing would have been a whole lot better. I understand not wanting to take a life, okay? I get that. But to be fair, they don't know what's going on, and it's you or them. So that's kind of my point of view. But either way, I mean, we got to see more of that. I just think it's funny, though, that the guns are the solution in the film for that part. I quite enjoy that. That's very, very great. But anyways, there you go. Gun rant over. Let's go ahead and move on to the only negative thing I have to say about this film. And this is not just about this film specifically. More of a nitpick I have with films in general, but it's present here, and so I got to talk about it. But I really hate how films treat infidelity. So, for example, let me tell you what happens in this film. Justine has this guy friend who's a cop that used to be a thing or whatever, and she wow-wows with him, and he's married, okay? And we see, his point of view with all this stuff, which doesn't really make it any better. I mean, he's kind of a butthole, to be honest. But either way, they kind of treat it semi-casually. I think they're trying to set up that we don't like this guy that much. So, it's supposed to, I guess, not be a big deal in our minds. But either way, I see it and I'm like, can we in Hollywood just stop, promoting this stuff? I think it should be demonized heavily, okay? Because it's marriage, okay? Marriage is very, very important. So we gotta treat it as if it is, okay? And then when someone's not faithful in said marriage, we need to demonize that, okay? Anyways, that's kind of my rant. That's all it is. Not so much a strike against this film specifically. It more is a strike against Hollywood in general and their just nonchalant attitude about being unfaithful. That's what I really, really hate. But generally speaking, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give this film on a scale from 1 to 10. I'm going to give it a rating. I tell everyone this before. I usually do it before, but I forgot, so I'm doing it now. But a 1 is bad. That is equivalent to stepping on a Lego brick. And 10 is Citizen Kane, okay? Fantastic movie. Greatest movie ever made. Not my personal opinion, greatest movie ever made. Objectively, greatest movie ever made. But regardless, scale from 1 to 10, I'm going to give Weapons an 8 because I thought it was a really good time. Again, it gave me something new. I was never bored for a single moment of the film, so I did quite enjoy it. Very good watch. I do recommend it to a lot of people because it was very, very fantastic. But what did you think of Weapons? Do you agree with my analysis? Why I think people liked it so much? How it innovated? Things like that? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, commentary, reviews, lists, all that good stuff, hit that subscribe button if you want more. But yeah, that's going to wrap things up for me this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys all for watching. I'm K-Swope, and I will see you in the next one.